Okay, this is going. Good to kick off, alright?
Okay.
Okay. Oi, pessoal. Welcome to the 8th edition of the Brazil podcast. I am Maurício Savarese, an independent journalist from São Paulo. I am a former Reuters Brazil correspondent, biggest online news portal. I also run a blog called A Brazilian Operating in this area. The Brazil podcast brings together foreign and domestic journalists for a weekly discussion covering all of the biggest news from Brazil.
It's all a bit fast, I think.
Yeah. Just I was gonna
So
say,
fast.
just go a little bit slower. Yeah, just go a little bit slower. Yeah, if you can.
No problem. We'll get pace back until the end of the year, hopefully.
I'm just gonna add a little something. I'm just gonna add a little something to the text.
No problemo.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. There we go.
Good.
Well, I
good.
mean, I didn't do much work for 2 weeks anyway.
Neither did I. Neither did I.
I mean, I had some stories knocked back because apparently, no one's interested in Brazil at the moment. But
Of course not. 6 months hangover. No one's going to care about Brazil. Not even if a nuclear bomb explodes here. So let's go again. Oi, pessoal. Welcome to the 8th edition of the Brazil podcast. I am Maurício Savarese, an independent journalist from São Paulo. I am a former Reuters Brazil correspondent, and I used to work for UOL, Brazil's biggest online news portal. I also run a blog called A Brazilian Operating in this area. The Brazil podcast brings together foreign and domestic journalists for a weekly discussion covering all of the biggest news from Brazil. This is our first program since the World Cup finished about 2 weeks ago, and we miss it already. We apologize for such a large break in production. Myself and the other regular contributors are freelancers. After being rushed off our feet during the World Cup, we all took a short holiday and we're just getting back into the swing of things now. I mean, probably this one is better to do again, isn't it?
Yeah, sure.
I'll go from the start. This is our first program since the World Cup finished in Brazil 2 weeks ago, and I miss it already. We apologize for such a large break in production. Myself and the other regular contributors are freelancers. After being rushed off our feet during the World Cup, we all took a short holiday, and we are just getting back into the swing of things now.
Perfect.
Okay. Is there a song?
Yeah, I believe Leo's added one. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Leo, the music man.
Okay, good. Now we have Spotify. Spotify solves it all. Do you use those?
I don't use it. I use YouTube still.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. So, this week's guests are Ben Taverner, freelance multimedia journalist in São Paulo, chief Brazil correspondent for Anadolu News Agency, and also contributor for the BBC, Al Jazeera, Mashable, and loads of people. Hi, Ben.
Hi.
I cut it short, sorry. But, Leo Macario, a film scholar who holds an MA in Communication and Culture and a PhD in Comparative Literature. His main areas of research include Brazil cinema, carnival music and films, and film and literature. Hi, Leo.
Oi, Maurício.
Leo is based in Rio de Janeiro, of course, just like...
Oh, I haven't got.
Where are you, Sam?
I've missed out myself. Wow.
And the man who needs no introduction.
I think Mauricio, would you mind doing Ben's just again, because he added a nice little thing on the end. I think
sorry.
I think it adds to that real family environment if we have all
That's good. That's good. Sorry. I'm actually having a cold as well, so sometimes I have to break because I feel like I'm going to sneeze. But
Don't worry.
let's go again. This week's guests are Ben Taverner, freelance multimedia journalist in São Paulo, chief Brazil correspondent for Anadolu News Agency, and also a contributor for the BBC, Al Jazeera, Mashable, and others. Not his first time on the podcast, so nice to have you back, Ben.
Hi, Mauricio.
Leo Macario, a film scholar who holds an MA in Communication and Culture and a PhD in Comparative Literature. His main areas of research include Brazilian cinema, carnival music and films, and film and literature. Leo is a Brazil podcast regular based in Rio de Janeiro. Hello, Leo.
Oi, Maurício.
Sorry, guys.
This is what happens when the
It's
weather
okay,
drops like 5
cheers.
degrees.
Oh, sorry.
Enjoy, Gesundheit.
Yeah, Gesundheit. And Sam Cowie, freelance journalist, multimedia journalist, and our producer in Rio de Janeiro. He needs no introduction.
Hi, Maurizio.
Welcome everybody to the 8th edition of the Brazil podcast. Our intro tune this week is O e A by Tom Zé.
Okay, good stuff. Good intro, yeah.
Okay. So it's been a month since our last podcast. Since then, Brazil lost 7-1 to Germany, and I was there to see it. The Germans won their fourth World Cup as well, which I was there to see as well. Too good to see Argentina win, I have to say, especially to everyone living in Rio now. I should do that again. I'm going to just give me a moment, please.
Sure.
Oh, that's what happens when you think you're going to get some holidays. You get sick. That's what happens. So let's go again. So it's been a month since our last podcast. Since then, Brazil were destroyed by Germany 7-1 in Minas Gerais. And Germany won their fourth World Cup. We've seen loads of action in Brazil during that month. So I would like to start from you guys in Rio de Janeiro. How did you see the World Cup taking place in Rio, which was pretty much the postcard city for Brazil, not only for tourism reasons but also for football?
Well, Brazil, there were some great games in Rio. There was a great atmosphere pretty much the whole time. Even when Brazil went out, Brazilian fans were crying perhaps for about 5 minutes, and then they all started joking. So that was great. And although I must say it was disappointing not to see the Brazil team take a 6th world title in the World Cup.
How about you, Leo? How was this in Niterói?
For me, now for me it was the same. As soon as Germany made the 3rd goal, we started to joke, and David Luiz' attitude didn't make any better for us. So.
Yeah, I was there at the Mineirão Stadium to see the whole thing unfold, and it was fun that after Brazil were scored against for the 4th time, people actually started laughing. Of course, that's not kind of laughter you get from watching Eddie Murphy in a show. It's the kind of laughter you get from seeing your uncle doing something bizarre at your wedding. But still, people were not as disappointed as many people hoped or expected. And there was a funny scene in the end of the match, which was I was just browsing my Twitter timeline to see what people were saying, and I could see loads of people expecting riots, people expecting loads of problems in Brazil during the aftermath of the Mineiraço. And then just a few rows below, I saw this Brazilian couple holding their tickets, hugging a German fan, and having their picture taken with a German guy and the ticket. So it was just as bipolar as I expected in some parts, with some Brazilians very, very upset, and of course triggering some violent acts, of course. But these were basically bar fights as far as I could see, and most people really got along with that. In the final, they were all for Germany because they didn't want Argentina to win in Brazil. So it wasn't as dreadful as many people expected. Ben, you were in São Paulo during the 7-1 match, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right. I actually decided to stay at home. I'd been going to the Fan Fest for most of the games, but for that one I decided just to sort of try out a Brazilian family atmosphere. And after about the 3rd game, people just turned the TV off. They started. We had some yellow and green balloons around the house. They just started popping those. And I immediately, realizing how much of a defeat it was, I headed straight to Avenida Paulista, with my camera to go and sort of find out what other people were feeling. People in my house were not happy. But so I headed down to Avenida Paulista, and there were people crying, even sort of an hour and a half, 2 hours afterwards. And when I ended up talking to people on camera, a lot of them started fairly kind of I don't know, moderate about what had happened. They said, of course, it was terrible, but it's just a game. And then the eyes started to well up just a little bit, and then you felt it in the voice. People were really getting angry, actually, in some cases, and the blame was nearly always squarely laid at Scolari's feet.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's consistent. That's consistent with what I heard and saw about the game. And for me, it was there was another feeling that I have to stress with you guys. That was the amount of disbelief. I mean, I wasn't able to watch the third game. Actually, I watched the game, but I wasn't able to understand that I was really, it wasn't reality for me, the Brazil-Netherlands game. I was still, how the heck did we lost a 7-1 game in Brazil? It was so unbelievable that I think I didn't collect my thoughts. Anyway, not even now.
Mm-hmm. And would you guys say that the defeat took a lot of the mood from the World Cup, or would you say that despite the hammering, the German hammering, or as some would say the 6-minute blackout, that this took the mood from the final weekend of the World Cup, or would you say that it was not the case and Brazilians found a way to enjoy the final days just as much?
Yeah, I think so. I certainly think in the final, the majority of Brazilians that I saw were cheering on. They were cheering on Germany against Argentina, of course, and they were still really in it. They were still really in it for the football, for the quality of football that was being played. I saw a fantastic scene actually in Copacabana on the night of the final. Sorry. There was a karaoke standing next to an Argentinian, and all game that one was wearing a Brazil shirt and one was wearing an Argentinian shirt, and all game they were swearing back and forth at each other because they were supporting different teams. At the end of the match, the karaoke hugged the Argentinian, they swapped shirts, and the karaoke said, "At least you didn't lose 7-1.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
It was a nice scene. It was a really nice scene.
I could see. Sorry, man.
And we can say that Brazilians were at the third place game. They tried to they donned their yellow shirts and everything, but I mean the seleção was so lost.
Yeah, I have to say I was at the Alzarão in Tijuca, which is usually absolutely packed. Let's sorry, there's a phone going. We'll start.
Yeah, that's mine.
Don't worry.
Because my sister just left the hospital, sorry.
Oh, is she okay?
Yeah, she is now.
Okay, good.
I hope she get well soon.
Oh, fucking hell. Can you listen to her voice?
Yeah.
Oh, fuck.
No, don't worry. Is she well?
Uh-huh. No, she's well. She had her. It was a strange thing. It was an issue in her brain, and we thought, oh, if it's something in your brain, that means it's very serious. But in the end, not really. If you just get enough, medicines for 2 or 3 weeks, you can actually solve that kind of swollen brain issue, which is something I never expected to be that easy. It's not like a trauma.
But it was like a concussion?
Nope.
No.
Nope. Okay. It was just the result of flu or something else.
Oh. I see.
Let me just see if she can pick this up in her own room without killing. Oh, she just hung up. Oh, fuck.
I was actually down, talking about what we were talking about, I was down at the Copacabana Fan Fest actually for the third game, that third place game. It was just hilarious.
Yeah.
There were like 10 Dutch people in the middle.
Hi again.
They automatically became celebrities at the end.
Oh my. So I think we can move on. Where were we? We were talking about the interesting scenes of Brazil, of Germany, Argentina, actually, the final. Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing I'd just like to add regarding, again, the 7-1 defeat, there was a lot of superstition in Rio de Janeiro, particularly that the only reason that Germany had managed to beat Brazil by so many goals was that they were wearing Flamengo colours. I don't know what you guys have to say about this.
Do you really want me to say anything about it?
Well, Flamengo's in the relegation zone, and Brazil could be as well. And maybe if Brazil were wearing the Flamengo shirts, that would make more sense, I guess.
I thought it was all to do with Mick Jagger.
Mick Jagger, of course, he has a Brazilian son.
And that was fun. That was really fun. I mean, Mick Jagger's. People in England don't understand why Mick Jagger is so funny for us Brazilians. But since 2010, he is the jinx. He is not only a big jinx, he is the jinx. If you have the photograph of Mick Jagger in another club shirt, your team will win.
He's almost the opposite of the octopus, isn't he? But
Yes.
I bet again.
Brazilians, the expression of that is interesting in Portuguese, isn't it? It's pé frio, cold foot. Is there any idea what that
Yeah.
Yeah, and I bet he gets a kick out of this because he's probably aware that people make all these jokes about him supporting the wrong team, but he still has loads of fun with that. One of the other things I'd like to ask, especially to you guys in Rio, because you've experienced that more than I have, although I have experienced that in the last few days of the World Cup. But Argentinians were teasing Brazilians from the start and saying that they were Brazil's father, and that means in Spanish in a way that they would beat Brazil all the time. And I mean, there were loads of Argentinian songs saying that Maradona is actually better than Pele and all these things. But I don't know if you expected Brazilians and Argentinians to be in big fights. I mean, you could see some drunk people getting really going at each other at Copacabana. But what was the sense you guys got there? Were there loads of problems between Brazilians and Argentinians because of football during the World Cup, or not as many?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I didn't. Some shouting matches, some slagging matches going on, but that was about it, really. I certainly think for the amount of people that there were, I mean, I think things could have been much worse. I mean, that could have been just because there was such a huge police presence, of course. That was obviously a factor into that. But yeah, I mean, no, I didn't see anything that I would consider a serious problem at all. No.
I see. I saw a bit of provocation, some back and forth, singing and shouting. I was told that there were some problems in some neighborhoods like Copacabana. I was not there. I was there the next day. And I even saw some Argentinians sleeping at the car, as you may remember. We saw a cab from Argentina circulating in Rio, which was fun as hell.
I saw that too.
You saw that?
Yeah, I saw that too in Santa Teresa. It wasn't actually. It wasn't actually one of these simpler cabs that they have in Argentina. It was one of the fanciest ones. The ones that have bilingual drivers and also. I don't know if you saw that as well, but most of the Argentinians coming to Brazil were basically club fans as well. So they were not the kind of crowd that, especially in Brazil, are very interested about the national team, which is wealthy Brazilians that are more fun, that are more fond of the event itself than of the of football. I don't know
No,
if you had that impression in going to World Cup
actually,
Stadium.
the Brazilians were they were feeling terrible because they didn't arrive with that much money. Well, they didn't arrive with any money. They just came because they love football, and that's something we have to support. Actually, they
Absolutely.
were they were great to you know uh, as they say, they are going to support Argentina every time they are going uh, about the aliento. I'm not condoning their behavior when they behave violently, but you have to look at them and the love that they have for the game, and you have to actually feel that Brazil lost some of it. We
Mhm.
love to win, but I don't know if we love football that much.
That's a very deep discussion. We should probably
Avoid
not
that
have this
one.
one because it's going to take years. One
Allow me
question.
to allow me to lighten it. I was when I was in Rio, just that last for the last two matches. The hotel that I was in was absolutely packed out with Argentinians, and that night, where before the final, I went and interviewed some of them, and the first thing they said to me, "Are you from Telesur? Are you from Telesur? Because we haven't told our wives that we've come here." They didn't want to be on camera.
So that means it's just like those
Wonderful.
English guys going to the Costa Rica game. They were with a banner saying, "Please don't film us. Our wives think we're fishing in West Wales."
Exactly.
Just one question to wrap up the World Cup. Maybe not for good, but at least for a reasonable amount of time. Was this the Cup of Cups?
For me, it was.
Yeah, for me in my lifetime, absolutely, yeah.
It was
Not
my
only for
only
the
World
fact that
Cup.
I.
Carry on.
Sorry, go ahead, Ben. Go ahead.
No, you finished. You finished.
Okay. Yeah, I would say that it definitely was the Cup of Cups for me. Not only because I was here and reporting about what was happening, but also just the sheer level of the quality of football.
Hmm. That makes sense, Ben.
Yeah, and as somebody that's not a massive fan of football, it was my first World Cup as well, but actually on site. It was extraordinary, and to be in the country, being there on that first day, where you and I met at that BBC Live point next to the stadium. Then I went down into that poor area right next to the stadium, and just to see everybody coming out into the party mode, it really felt like it should be there. And the football that followed was it really got me into the game. So all I can say is thank you, World Cup, and I'll see you in Russia because I might
Uh,
well do.
Really, really, is that a decision?
It's definitely there because my background is in Russian. I speak
Yeah.
Russian. I lived there before, and I see absolutely no reason why I shouldn't follow the World Cup now that I've seen it all. We've barely written anything in the last 3 years that didn't have the words World Cup in it. So it almost feels like there's a massive void in my life now. Not that it kind of not that it felt that it not that I felt that it was lacking before, but it found room somewhere, and now it feels like there's a void.
Well, just wait for the Olympics. That's going to be even bigger. And I tell everyone, no one believes me, but the Olympics are actually 3 times bigger than the World Cup. But I don't know if you agree with this, but my impression is that of course the Brazilian World Cup was really really nice. The trouble weren't really there. There were issues, of course, especially in Cuiabá and the overpass collapse in Belo Horizonte. But I don't know if you agree with this, but my impression is that there are two things that are reasonably connected to make this the Cup of Cups off the field. Because on the pitch, that's probably the best World Cup I've seen. But what I consider is one, the expectations were very very low. So because of the 6 months before the World Cup, everyone thought this was going to be terrible, and since it wasn't, that was already good enough. And two, there is this massive lack of knowledge about Brazil abroad, and because people didn't know much about Brazil, when they had the chance to get to know it just a little bit more, it felt like a heartwarming experience, as it wouldn't have been in Germany or in England or in other countries which are very well known, both for their ups and for their downs. And Brazil was much more famous for their downs. And since people got to know more about the country, it felt like a more surprising experience. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think, well, I mean, they did a tourist survey, didn't they, of the tourists that came here? I think 95% say they'd love to come back, and yeah, I think visitors overall were very impressed all round with one, the warmth of the Brazilian people, two, the sheer level of football, the cities, the landscapes, the natural beauty, whatever it was. I feel that like everybody that came here was suitably impressed, and yeah, it would be great if they came back.
Yeah, yeah. Just to really finish, my impression that, for example, Germany, the World Cup was just fantastic. I have no doubt that there was footballing atmosphere, that you could actually get a train from each stadium and go to the other very quickly. That if you think Cup of Cups organization wise, they are probably ahead. But the German culture and the German football are much more famous at an European level and by most tourists than Brazil, because those 95% of tourists which said they would come back, many of those basically have come to Brazil. They came to Brazil for the first time, right?
Absolutely.
No
Yeah.
doubt
Yeah.
about
So,
that.
Some of the people that I spoke to in Rio had actually booked three weeks just to be in Rio, and I said, "Why aren't you going elsewhere in Brazil?" They said, "Well, we just want to stick around here. We heard there's enough to do in Rio." And I think actually, despite the World Cup was spread over so many cities in Brazil, I think the coverage was actually not as good as it could have been. I think it was still extremely Rio-centric. I mean, obviously most of the coverage I could see was here in Brazil, but what I did manage to see from outside, I think people have just paid so much money. All the broadcasters have paid so much money to bring people out here, and a lot brought them out just for the first couple of weeks. That it unfortunately was still quite Rio-centric. But there were people that, of course, took the opportunity, Brazil being so far, to actually get out there and see some of the Amazon or the Pantanal or some of the Northeast. But a lot of people did just stick around Rio, and I think that's a bit of a shame.
Yeah, I'd have
that's
to
fair,
agree with Ben there.
fair to say. Should we move on?
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
but we won't avoid Seleção.
Oh, really? Should we? We could
Um,
talk about Scolari because he was just well, we can do that because Scolari was just he's just signed by Grêmio.
yeah, so let's try and get into a little bit of convo just to wrap this up because we've been
Okay.
on this for about 15 minutes now. Let's just try and get
Yes.
into a little bit of convo. And I don't really know much about this, so you and Leo are best talking about this. But maybe about Dunga and about Scolari going to Gremio, something like this.
Yeah.
And
Good.
then maybe just finish by letting the listeners know that the Brazilian Championship's ongoing at the moment, and this
Okay.
kind of thing. It's good.
No problem. So one other World Cup legacy is that we have Dunga back do we have Dunga back in charge of the national team? The guy who
Oh,
was very famous for his fantastic style, his great goals, his great passes. So, Leo, how do you feel about this brilliant former footballer, genius coach, almost the Pep Guardiola of Brazilian football,
oh,
coming back to the national team to rescue us from the 7-1 hammering?
I feel that the 7-1's not over.
Of course it's not.
I feel you know when when we try to make a podcast wrap up of the World Cup before, our feeling was that, oh, this is the time when Brazil is going to make some kind of soul searching about their football style, about our football style, about the things we like to do in a football pitch, and the things we're famous for, and then Dunga. Come on, what on earth are they thinking? I mean, we know that the people responsible for the CBF are, they are the same since the military regime. So we could not expect that much from them. And at the same time, it's strange because people talk so much about Germany, and I was thinking about that actually. I was thinking that the first time Dunga was in Brazilian shirt in a World Cup, 1990, he was somehow erroneously appointed as the culprit for our failure in the World Cup in Italy. And then Ricardo Teixeira chose Falcão as our head coach because he tried to emulate Beckenbauer. Falcão was a guy, a nice fellow, good bloke, always in the best suit available, and he was somehow a Beckenbauer impersonator, a Brazilian Beckenbauer. And Falcão was a great player, but he was a failure as our head coach. And then, if you think about this again, I think Dunga was elected as Brazilian coach in 2010, maybe to bring something Klinsmann was trying to have in the German as the German coach in 2006. And again, what on earth were they thinking? It couldn't be so. I mean, it was a mistake all over again. And then again, Brazil won some Copa America, won some Confederations Cup, and everything is as the same. Oh, Brazil is so powerful. We are the best thing on earth. And the truth is, whenever you ask those guys what they think about football, they just think about winning titles, and they think this is the long view of them is that they have to win a title. They couldn't tell you if they think football must be taught at school. I'm not having this discussion also, but they wouldn't think anything about anything related to football. They are just worried about if they are going to win the World Cup, even if it is by penalties.
That makes sense, and I would say that that choice by Dunga being the next the new national team coach, it makes me feel trapped in 1994 because it is pretty much the same group taking over and over the national team. And one other interesting thing is that of course the Brazilian Championship had a kind of a halt during the World Cup, and it's just resumed. And as of now, we have 4 clubs which have the same coaches they had in 1994, which is Flamengo. Vanderlei Luxemburgo was the new coach of Flamengo, and he was in charge in 94 as well. Levir Coupe, the guy who is in charge of Atlético Mineiro, he was in charge in 94 as well. Abel Braga, who was in charge of Internacional then, he's in charge now. And Luis Felipe Scolari, the guy who took Brazil to the fabulous 7-1 defeat, he's in charge of Grêmio again, which is the place where it all began. So it feels as if Brazil is going round in circles because it doesn't know where to take their football to. And as long as Dunga remains in charge, I find it very difficult to see Brazil actually outclassing Germany or outclassing Spain or outclassing Holland, teams that have had better crops of players in the last few years and who have employed their tactics in better fashion as well. So, too bad.
And
the World Cup is really finished. Sorry?
Mauricio, do you know what they will say? They will say to us, "Oh, come on, Dunga was able to make Brazil win Argentina by 3-0, or we always beat Messi, or it's so narrow. Their view is so narrow. It's unbelievable.
I say to my friends, only the federal police can save Brazilian football, really. Well, only the federal police, only the feds. Well, so we should go to another World Cup legacy then, which is the arbitrary arrests of people in Rio, São Paulo, and many other cities. Some people were actually arrested because they were carrying very dangerous things, such as Nirvana banners, Carta Capital magazines. What else? There was a guy who was arrested because he has a skull and a skull in a shirt, and
Can I just say, I think it's okay to arrest somebody if they're carrying a copy of Asia magazine. I think that's all right.
well, there should be loads of people arrested for that, but they are not going to jail for that. I would like to hear your opinion about how strong how strong are the police now? Do you think that the protest not being as big as some people expected actually made the police stronger and less law-abiding than they should?
Well, I think it's a question of what came first, really, out of the chicken or the egg. Were the police more violent first, or did people have less interest in going to the protests first? I would have to say I think the high level of police violence and police aggression really stopped people from going to the protests. Police were particularly violent. I think the protests certainly had become fatigued and people had lost interest, but especially during the final, from what I could understand, and even before the actual final itself, and the days coming up to the final. And what was particularly despicable was this like level of intimidation going around, like pre-dawn arrests at people's houses and things like this. And now all of these people have been released, and one has to question, why were they arrested for in the first place? There's been people talking about there was evidence of recorded phone calls plans to put together an armed group and this kind of thing, and it's just nonsense, really. And they were held for a certain amount of time and then let out on the habeas corpus.
Do you know who was also in the list of suspects? Mikhail Bakhtin.
Yes, that's. I think he's a little bit old for going to protest, isn't he? He's a little bit old.
Like 100.
140, is that not a little bit old for going to protests?
Oh
no, he's older than that. He died in 18
Well, that shows how our police are well read and aware.
Exactly. That shows the level of surveillance, right?
Yeah, that shows they're really catching everything they can in a way. But so some of these arrests are more than unlawful. They are also there's loads of accusations that some of the evidence were actually fabricated, especially against a São Paulo professor, Fábio Hideki. Everyone around him says he was up to no bad things, and still he's incarcerated in a maximum security prison in São Paulo. So where do you see the police going from now, from here to the future, Ben? You've been in some of these protests, and you can see some of these policemen taking on protesters much more heavily than they should. So what do you think is next?
Well, first of all, I was there when both Rafael Marques Luzvagi and Fábio Hideki were arrested. That was a culmination of something that started the protest before. If you remember, in São Paulo, there was a protest that went down towards the Marginal Pinheiros, and then the Black Bloc faction smashed up a Mercedes showroom. They caused I think it was a couple of million reais worth of damage in the end. The police at that protest had actually agreed with them that they would stand back, because they'd said that these protests had been getting a little bit out of hand, small numbers, but actually violent for the number of people there were, because the police were so always just accompanying them and escorting them very tightly, creating these corridors of police always outnumbering the protesters as well. So for that protest, they stood back, and then this Black Bloc group just went in and smashed everything up. So I think anything that came after that, and because it was so close to the beginning of the World Cup, there was actually after the World Cup had started, there was no question that the police were going to have any problems after that. They were going to go in and they weren't going to even distinguish between journalists and protesters a lot of the time. As I say, that day that those two people were arrested, Rafael Marques Luzvagui and Fabio Hideki Arano, who are two very different people, we have to say. Fabio Hideki is an USP, University of São Paulo, worker, and he was a student there. And the other guy, if you believe what you read online, Rafael Marques Luzvagui fought in Colombia with the FARC, fought with the Foreign Legion in France, and was heading to Ukraine to fight alongside pro-Russian rebels. Unfortunately, the police in São Paulo got in the way of that last fight.
Too bad.
Too bad. But, you know, when we were there, there were lawyers. At all of these protests, there are legal representatives, and they said that things had been planted on both of them. And certainly when Fabio Hideki was arrested inside one of the metro stations, I was there right next to him, and the police took out this little black box and said, "Look, this is explosive. This is a detonator." And he was shouting, you know, "This wasn't in my bag. This wasn't in my bag." And that happened a number of times. The legal representatives that I spoke to said the police are very handy with putting things in people's bags or constructing evidence after the event. A lot of the police there actually were in masks and didn't have identification. So there's clearly a lot of things that weren't right and weren't in accordance with the law. And the latest news on those Rio protesters, as Sam said, had been released after they got their habeas corpuses, is that the judge that gave those habeas corpuses has now been asked to reconsider, because I think the whole process kind of looked like a bit of a mockery of the system. You know, they went in, they preventatively arrested, I love that phrase, they preventatively arrested all of these people the night before the final, which
we learned it from George Bush.
Yeah, exactly. the Brazilian Guantanamo. They had those protests away very neatly for 5 days while you know the final was happening and tourists were enjoying the last few days in Rio. And then what's happened? They've been laughed at. This judge even made a fanciful comment on Facebook. You know, I can't remember the exact phrase, but it was something like "release these people under the wings of freedom" or something like that. You know, so he was clearly mocking the whole.
He quoted a song.
He quoted. That's right.
He quoted a song.
He quoted a song. And he was clearly saying this should never have happened. I mean, of course, the two that were involved with the death of the cameraman in February, of course, stayed in prison. But the rest of them, and it's turned into a bit of a novella, to be honest, with Sininho.
Absolutely.
I mean, love triangles and police. Could you novella now?
Tinkerbell.
Could you tell our listeners about the major issue of a relationship actually being the reason why massive protests spread around Brazil in the last year or so?
You go back to last year.
Yeah. No. I mean, because one of the reasons for protests to be so difficult is that there's actually a love crisis in the middle of the whole thing, isn't there?
You're leading me to something, but I'm not catching the bait. Carry on.
No. I was actually talking about Sininho. Yeah, because the press just released loads of material about Sininho, who is one of the activists basically, who was portrayed as one of the main leaders of the protesters.
Fine.
And it seems that she's so vicious. She's so vicious that she actually stole another activist's boyfriend.
Yeah. Why don't you jump in and say that? I think you know the story about her better.
No, that's fine. Maybe that's too much, isn't it?
No, I think it's nice. I think you should jump in.
That's too much. That's too much drama, I guess. Too much drama, and we love novellas, and people are going to see that as a weak plot. But just to be more specific about the next 6 months, because we're going to have general elections, and the police are surely going to be part of the debate. Do you think Brazilians, actually most of them, approve of these unlawful prisons and unlawful arrests and the way the police have dealt with the protesters, or do you think that the governors who have been acting so so harshly because the police are under their command, do you think they are actually going to get a bump in the elections because of the treatment of the police to protesters?
I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference, to be honest. I mean, regarding how the general public sees the protesters and the way they're treated, unfortunately, we know in Brazil that it's a very polarized debate. You know, a lot of people, unfortunately, would say, no, put them in prison. They deserve to be in prison. They should stay in prison forever. Kill them. You know, it's quite a polarized place when it comes to protests, crime, human rights, these kinds of things. We have all kinds of complicating factors in Brazil. Lots of it is stemming from religion, I must say. Is it going to make a difference in the governor elections? I really don't think so. I don't think so. Certainly not in Rio, anyway.
I think it's gonna depend a lot on how the media spin it. I think people change their mind on the protests from week to week. What you saw last year, you saw a major swing from the media, particularly Globo, of course, who swung from look at these despicable protesters that, oh my God, they're attacking our journalists. No, you know, the police are awful, and it's kind of swung back now that the media saw that they could get a great story out of the protesters in Rio. As we said, there's been a whole novella around Sininho and her love triangle. I think a lot of that debate will be led by the media, and at the moment, I think that that whole debate about the law that was going to be brought in, criminalising a lot of masked protesters and the black blocs, a lot of that's died away. So, I mean, and in terms of how the protests are going to go over the next few months, I was looking at some of the protest groups' Facebooks today. They all have Facebook groups, of course. That's how they bring people together, and they're even asking themselves whether they should carry on. What are we doing? Is it worth us going to the streets anymore? We're going to see more protests from that homeless workers movement, of course, because they've still got plenty of work to do with all their hundreds of thousands of homeless workers around the country. But it's something that's different, and that story needs to be told, that those protests are different from what we saw last year, and the things that we saw even leading up to the protests to the World Cup this year. That's different again. So there's been a lot of media from outside lumping everything together.
Absolutely.
It really should be said that those things are disparate. But you know, we might see a little spike in protests coming up to the World Cup. Sorry, well, I can't say anything without World Cup now. We might see some more protests popping up. We might see some more protests popping up now ahead of the elections. But I think a lot of them are going to be a legacy of exactly what we're seeing now. These preventative arrests, freedom for these people. Still, there are factions of these protests saying free reinstate the people that were sacked during those strikes that we talked about, the metro strikes that happened before the World Cup. I think there's just going to be a gradual petering out with a couple of spikes in there, because what have they got really to fight for now? Well, the Olympics in a couple of years, but perhaps we're too far away from that to have any protests right now.
Yeah, it's an interesting. Sorry. It's an interesting point that Ben makes there about the homeless workers movement. So I think there probably will be an increase in protests, but coming from the social movements as opposed to the anti-World Cup groups or the black bloc groups, this kind of thing. So I think there probably will be an increase in protests coming from like the homeless workers movements, the landless workers movements, this kind of thing. And I think that could have an impact on the election.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wish I were as optimistic about police doing what they do and not giving governors a better result in the polls. And I could see that in São Paulo, where we have a massive water crisis. We have loads of allegations of corruptions in the metro, but still, Governor Geraldo Alckmin, who has been in charge for almost 20 years, he's got 54% in the polls, and the only explanation I can find, at least during the last trimester, is that police are seen as more effective, although it's not exactly effectiveness we're talking about. In Rio, if you take a look at what Governor Luiz Pezão got he basically got a bump of 10% in 2 months. He was basically under 3 points because he was so linked to his predecessor, Governor Sergio Cabral, who was one of the main targets of the protests, that he couldn't get better results in the polls, and now he's at 14, looking better for the next few months. He could actually hold his office, which would be quite a shock for a state in which the protests have gotten massively violent last year, especially until the death of cameraman Santiago. So my impression is that the governors are actually taking the decision to tell their police to be just like that, because it's actually popular with voters. If you watch Brazilian TV shows, especially in the TVs that are not global, which is the most popular one, but the other ones which resonate a lot in Rio and São Paulo and Belo Horizonte, the police shows, they basically show the police cracking hard on those people, and they don't care about any human rights in the end. And that kind of speech has become more and more common since last year. My impression, and that we can debate in other occasions as well, is that the protesters, they didn't detect what was the issue after the transport fares were not raised in São Paulo and Rio. My impression is that they could have talked about the police and could have made them a target in the sense of bringing protests about proper handling by the police, but instead they decided to go for the anti-World Cup platform and for agendas that are not really things we can remember now, things that were voted by Congress and are now pretty much forgotten. But my impression is that in the next 2 months, the police could be just as violent and just as repressive, basically because we have governors who want to hold their offices. Although this is a very São Paulo-centric and Rio-centric impression, that can spread to other states as well, because they do pay attention to what happens here, and police can be very difficult until the end of the year. So just my impression.
In Northeast, Mauricio, I think that will happen in Northeast. In the Northeast too, at least in some states, and I believe that you point that you were. It is something we spoke of in this podcast, now in other podcasts. Brazil has a kind of a sympathy to that, and it resonates with a kind of a, some conservative aspects that people might not think are so present in Brazil, and they are.
Mm-hmm. As long as the police don't touch them, they're fine with that.
They love when police don't touch them. They love when that's about when the police is strict with others, and of course when with their children, no, not at all. They try to fight the team.
They try to find a way, no doubt. Since we're talking about elections, can we talk about the Santander gaffe, which has just made someone get fired?
Santander Gate.
Yeah, the Santander Gate, which President Dilma has already reacted to, saying, well, under this, the underlying discourse is that this is electoral terrorism, saying that in a note they sent to their very, very wealthy clients, the VVIP clients, Santander said that re-election of President Dilma Rousseff can actually be bad for their clients, and they should pay attention to that when they're handling their assets. So what do you make of this? What do you think it's fair to say that President Dilma Rousseff is going to be bad for the markets if she's re-elected, or does her record prove that?
Well, I mean, for a start, you really have to consider that the stock market doesn't affect Brazil in the same way that it affects London, New York, for example. Brazil's economy is more based on commodities. So I would have to say it doesn't make. I think this whole idea that Dilma's bad for the market is just some speculation talk, and it's been quite interesting to see Santander run away like with like a dog with its tail between its legs. All of a sudden, very quite worried. They've sacked their employee that sent the note round straight away, and yeah, it's quite an interesting situation.
Well, and running away to Spain doesn't seem to be a good idea at the moment. That's unavoidable.
I love this. I love this thing with Brazilian elections, that when people talk about elections, they are so different. Those two big parties, they do fight and stand for things so differently. They are radically different, and when they are in office, they are the same. I mean,
pretty much.
It bears no no touch with the reality.
Yeah. What I was talking about, I was talking to a couple of market agents a few days ago, and they said the reason why the market believes Dilma is not going to be as good for the market can be noted by Petrobras, because that's a benchmark company for Brazil, and they say their handling of the company is very ideological, because she could have raised the gas prices, and instead she's kept a lid on them, basically because that would stimulate inflation. Do you have the impression that that this government is particularly ideological in the way it handles the economy, or not?
Well, I haven't been in Brazil long enough. Well, hang on, that's not quite true. Ideological in the way they handle the economy. Well, they don't believe in pure market forces. You know, they're more Keynesianists as opposed to neoliberals, of course. So yeah, they don't believe in pure market forces. They believe in market intervention, with state intervention, nationalised companies. If that's ideological, then I suppose so. Yeah.
I mean, the big thing with Dilma is that all roads lead to her, and it's not just with the economy. It's with foreign policy. It's everything. She doesn't like foreign policy, as we've seen recently with Israel. She normally prefers to give that one a bit of a miss. But with the economy, she likes to be really in control, and I think that's something that the markets haven't liked. Certainly, investors have been running away from Brazil at a rather scary rate over the last few years, because they see her as very controlling, and of course she's not going to change any of this very kind of tight fiscal policy that she's got on the country and has had since she got into the country anytime soon. So I think that's one reason why these companies like Santander probably have been telling their premier customers that another 4 years of Dilma probably wouldn't be great for the markets, because they're worried that it's going to be all the same. Of course, she's not going to do anything right now, because it would be politically unpalatable to change anything in the run-up to the election. Anything that affects Brazilians' wallets is going to be banned for the election. You know, anything that affects unemployment levels or inflation, which of course we're getting within a hair's breadth of that upper tolerance band of the inflation target. And they're worried, and I think that with this whole Santander Gate thing, the other people that are vying for these elections, the other two main rivals, Aécio Neves and Eduardo Campos, have both turned around and not said, "Oh, this was so terrible. How dare Santander advise its customer which way to vote?" They've turned around and looked at it a different way. They've said, "Well, actually, this kind of shows that there is a skepticism in the markets as to the way that she deals with the economy, with her kind of iron fist over all these fiscal policies that she has." Of course, she's a trained economist, and people love to point that out. But despite that, she has kept such a tight grip on the economy that I think people are looking for something for her to kind of relax and let the markets guide a little bit more. If she does come back in, of course, that's all to be played out if she does come back in. But that's the the economy is absolutely front and center of this election coming up, and I think Neves is going to really play to that. He's going to say, look, I'm going to be much more pro-business. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to not be just controlled by my own kind of, as you say, economic background and economic training.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
But Ben, there is something. No, sorry, Mauricio. There is something Mauricio said that we have to go back a few years. Petrobras were always ideologically driven. I mean, it is unbelievable that people forget that Petrobras was always up. You know, the president of Petrobras was always a political appointed person. That was not different. That was not different when PSDB were running Brazil. That's the point. That's the main point. The other thing is about the investors, and I believe they come and go as fast as they can. I don't know if it is something about Dilma, and I believe that she likes to control. She likes to have a tight fist around the economy. There's no doubt about that. And maybe ISU might point that he could do something more towards a market that runs itself and stuff. I'm not debating this, but investors come and go, and it won't be that different, and that's the main point. And to make this as a radical debate, as they were completely different, that's the point that amazes me, because in reality, that's not what we see.
Mm-hmm. My impression is that there is a confidence gap between the market and Dilma, because not only because of the Petrobras handling in the last few years, but also because she has used budgetary tools per se to make the primary surplus valid, and she has used some of these techniques basically to hide some of the news which weren't that good for the government as well. So there is a reason for the confidence gap. On the other way, investors in Brazil have had they need too many guarantees to operate here. So and that's long criticism about foreigners. Foreign investors in Brazil. So if you're investing in Brazil or not because of Dilma, that doesn't show you have a proper commitment to the country itself. So if you and that's pretty much the definition of speculation. It's short term. It's money that comes for a short time, and 4 years is not exactly the kind of money that will stay committed to the country in the long run. So just like as Sam was saying. The financial markets are not the stock market is not that important to Brazil. There are others. There are other investors which are industries, and I've talked to one of them, which is called Jorge Gerdau. Although he's very close to the government, he is a guy who handles his money properly, and he says, well, everyone who has big plans for Brazil is not going to depend on a government or the other to make their investments. What we look at is jobs and income. If jobs are fine and income are fine, it's fine too. It's fine too. We're going to make the investment because that's going to bring the revenues we need to keep pushing. And my impression is that this gap of confidence is going to be news at least until the elections, and then we're going to see which way they're going. If they're really going away, well, good luck with that. If they're not, that shows was basically a way to pressure Dilma to doing whatever they want, which is less regulation, some raises, especially the gas raises and the gas rise and other elements that could also foster inflation. It's going to be a very interesting few months to see.
Let's not forget as well that Santander, they make 20% of their total profit comes out of Brazil. So they're not going anywhere anytime soon. I think there's a lot I think a lot of investors are kind of like just sulking that Brazil hasn't had the like phenomenal growth rates that it had like 5 to 10 years ago. Growth is kind of like it's slowed down a little bit. But let's not forget as well that it's still higher than the United States, the European Union, and Russia. And growth has really slowed down in all of those countries. So that's going to affect that affects Brazil's growth rates as well.
Very good. Should we wrap up, guys?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you're ready to, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
We've spoken for about an hour.
Yeah, we have. How you feeling over there?
I'm feeling good and better now. Even my flu is even my cold is getting better, so that's good. So I'm wrapping up.
So let's keep it going.
Yeah, till tomorrow. Okay, so that's it for this week. Thanks to our guests. You've been listening to the Brazil podcast. This week I leave you with Luis Melodia singing Pérola Negra.
Okay, perfect.
Is that good?
That's great. Yes. Nice podcast. It's gonna be nice and easy for me to edit that one. Lovely.